Hi friends, welcome back to Bigfoot Lovers. I'm Benjamin, and I've got a story for you today that comes straight from a woman named Bonnie, who's now in her 50s. This one takes us back to the 1918s in Lincoln County, Missouri, just outside of Troy. Bonnie was a teenager at the time. Her parents worked long hours, so after school, she was often dropped off at her grandparents' farm by her Aunt Cheryl. Aunt Cheryl was married to Uncle Ray, her dad's younger brother. What happened during those quiet country days is something Bonnie never forgot. It's not my story, but it's one I think you'll want to hear. So settle in, let's get started. Bonnie grew up spending a lot of time on her grandparents' farm in Lincoln County, Missouri. Back in the 1980s, when this story takes place, she was a teenager. Her parents worked long hours in town, so most afternoons she'd be dropped off at the farm by her Aunt Cheryl. The farm had once been busy with livestock, cattle, pigs and horses, but by the time Bonnie was coming around regularly, most of that was gone. The only animals left were a small group of chickens kept in a large wooden coop. The coop was built onto the side of an old tool shed. The shed was worn down and weathered, but the coop was still solid and in good shape. Bonnie liked helping out, and her favourite chore was collecting eggs. She'd take the old basket her grandma gave her and walk out to the coop. It made her feel useful. She liked the quiet routine of it, the soft clucks of the hens, the warmth of the eggs, and the smell of straw. It was a simple task, but she looked forward to it. About 300 feet behind the farmhouse stood a large barn. It was once used for horses and cattle. You could still see the old stalls and feeding areas. There was even an old pig pen with rusted troughs out back. Nobody used the barn anymore, but her grandparents never tore it down. It just stood there, solid and silent. Behind the barn, just about 50 feet away, began the tree line. A thick stretch of woods ran all along the back of the property. Bonnie always felt like something could be watching from those trees, but she never said it out loud. Her grandparents were in their 70s at the time, but they were still strong. They didn't sit around. Her grandfather was always fixing or checking something, and her grandmother kept the house running like clockwork. They were kind people, gentle with Bonnie, but clear about right and wrong. It was a quiet life on the farm. Nothing ever seemed out of place. That's why what happened next was so unexpected, and why it stayed with Bonnie for the rest of her life. One afternoon, shortly after Aunt Cheryl dropped Bonnie off at the farm, her grandparents called her into the kitchen. Their tone was calm but serious. Her first thought was that she'd done something wrong. Maybe she forgot to latch the chicken coop or left a light on, but they quickly told her she wasn't in trouble. Her grandfather looked at her, then said he needed to tell her something important. He explained that for the past 2 weeks, there had been visitors on the property, not human ones. He told Bonnie that a large hairy man and a hairy woman had been staying in the old barn behind the house. Bonnie blinked, not sure what to say. She asked him what he meant. People in costumes? Her grandfather shook his head. He said he first saw them early one morning while he was out checking on the chickens. He noticed the barn door was open, and that wasn't normal, so he walked over to take a look. Standing just inside the barn were 2 enormous hairy figures. One was clearly male, the other female. They were tall, broad-shouldered, and completely covered in thick, dark hair, but what stood out most was their eyes. He said there was intelligence behind them, like they understood more than you'd think. Bonnie asked if he was scared. A little, he admitted, but they didn't look like they wanted trouble. He told her he spoke to them, just talked to them, plain and simple, like he would to anyone. He didn't know why, but he felt like they understood him. Then he gave them 3 rules. Rule 1, he said, don't come near the family, you stay away from the house. Rule 2, don't touch the chickens, you leave them be. And rule 3, don't break anything. That was it. Bonnie sat in silence, trying to picture it. She asked what they did when he laid down those rules. Her grandfather said the male let out a low breath, kind of like a sigh. Then the female did the same. He took it as a sign they agreed. He said they never made a move toward him, never acted wild or dangerous, just stood there, quiet and watchful. Bonnie couldn't believe what she was hearing. 2 giant, hairy beings, living in the barn just a few hundred feet from the house. And her grandparents weren't afraid? But it was only the beginning. Bonnie's grandfather continued his story. He told her that after he laid out his 3 rules to the creatures, stay away from the family, don't touch the chickens, and don't break anything. They didn't speak, of course, but they reacted in a way that surprised him. The tall male let out a slow, deep exhale. Right after, the female did the same. He said it felt like they understood him. That shared breath wasn't random. It was a response, like a calm nod. He said he couldn't explain it, but in his gut, he felt they had agreed to the rules. Bonnie was stunned. Her first reaction was excitement. She wanted to see them with her own eyes. "Can I see them?" she asked. "Please, Grandpa." He looked at her, thought for a moment, and then nodded. But he made it clear, no going outside, no sneaking out to the barn. If she was going to see them, it had to be from inside the house. It wasn't about being scared, he told her, but about being respectful and safe. He explained that the creatures seemed to leave the barn before dawn and return late at night. They kept to themselves, slipped into the woods during the day, and only came back under cover of darkness. They never tried to get near the house and never caused a problem. So a plan was made. The next time Bonnie stayed the night at her grandparents' place, they'd wake her up before sunrise. She could watch from the kitchen window with Grandpa's binoculars. That would be the safest way, Bonnie agreed. She was curious, but she wasn't reckless. If her grandparents trusted these beings enough to let them stay, then she could trust their rules too. She promised not to tell anyone, not her parents, not Aunt Cheryl, not her friends at school. It would stay between her and her grandparents. What she didn't know then was how much that one morning would stick with her for the rest of her life. Before they wrapped up the conversation, Bonnie's grandfather leaned in a little closer and said something serious. "You can't tell anyone about this," he told her. "Not your mom or dad, not Uncle Ray or Aunt Cheryl, and especially not the kids at school. This stays between us." Bonnie understood. She could see it wasn't just about keeping quiet. It was about trust. Her grandparents weren't scared of these creatures, and they didn't want trouble stirred up by others who might not understand. She looked him in the eye and nodded. "I promise," she said. And she meant it. For a teenage girl, it was a big responsibility. But she didn't take it lightly. From that moment on, it became her special secret. Something she shared only with her grandparents, a private part of her growing up years on that quiet Missouri farm. As time went on, she never once broke that promise, not even when it was tempting to tell a friend or whisper it to someone she trusted. She knew what it meant to her grandparents, and that was enough. There's something about the promises we make as children, especially the ones made in moments like this. When a grandparent shares something personal and looks you in the eye, it sticks with you. It becomes a part of who you are. Bonnie didn't just keep a secret, she honored the kind of trust that shapes a young heart, and it's that kind of simple, steady loyalty that often lasts a lifetime. That Friday night, Bonnie packed her overnight bag and went to stay with her grandparents, just like they'd planned. But this visit felt different. She knew something was coming, something she might never forget. She tried to act normal, eating dinner and helping Grandma with the dishes, but inside her mind was racing. She was too excited to sleep. She laid in the spare bedroom, staring at the ceiling, wondering what those tall, hairy people really looked like up close. The night felt long. Every little sound from outside made her ears perk up. An owl in the trees, a creak from the old wooden floor. But she stayed put, just like she'd promised. Then, just before dawn, the soft knock came at her door. "Bonnie?" Grandma whispered, gently opening it. "Time to get up." She slipped out of bed, put on her sweater and tiptoed to the kitchen. Grandpa was already there, standing by the window. The binoculars were sitting on the table, ready. It was almost time. The air outside was still and grey, just starting to lighten with the first hint of morning. Bonnie's heart was beating fast, but it wasn't from fear. It was pure, honest curiosity. Everything they'd talked about for the past week had led to this one quiet moment. Bonnie joined her grandfather at the kitchen window. The binoculars were already sitting on the table, and he handed them to her with a quiet nod. The morning light was just starting to break, casting a pale glow across the fields. "Keep your eyes on the barn," he said softly. She raised the binoculars and focused on the large, weathered barn about 300 feet from the house. Nothing moved at first. The stillness of morning hung in the air like a held breath. Then, slowly, the barn doors creaked open. Bonnie's breath caught. Out stepped a massive figure, tall, broad, and completely covered in shaggy brown fur. The fur looked dirty and matted, hanging in thick strands. The creature moved quietly, almost gracefully, its steps careful and smooth. It was followed closely by a second figure. Shorter than the first, but still tall and powerful, also covered in thick fur. The second one had a different shape, more rounded in the chest, slightly narrower shoulders. Bonnie whispered, "That's the female, isn't it?" Grandpa nodded. They both stood at the window, watching in silence. The creatures didn't look around. They just walked along the side of the barn and disappeared around the corner, heading toward the trees that lined the back of the property. Bonnie lowered the binoculars. She was stunned. "I looked kind of like Chewbacca," she said quietly, "but real, bigger, more solid." Her grandpa gave a small chuckle. "Yeah, that's not a bad way to put it." But it wasn't funny. It was humbling. Bonnie didn't feel scared, not even a little, just amazed. These weren't monsters or wild animals. They were something else, something intelligent, something that knew how to stay hidden. She looked at her grandfather. "They didn't even look our way." "Men never do," he said. "They know how to avoid being seen." The moment passed quickly. The barn doors were now closed again, just like before. But Bonnie knew what she had seen, and it would stay with her for the rest of her life. Bonnie's grandparents didn't see the hairy visitors much after that first sighting. According to Grandpa, the two creatures continued staying in the barn for a few more months. They came and went quietly, always in the dark hours before dawn or after nightfall. They never caused trouble and stuck to the rules he had set. Then one night, something unusual happened. It was late. Bonnie wasn't there that night, but Grandpa later told her the story. He had been sitting near the back window, reading. From outside, he suddenly heard a pack of coyotes yipping and barking, not far from the chicken coop. The noise was loud and wild, and it stirred up the chickens badly. They were clucking and flapping in panic. Grandpa stood up, ready to head out the door. But then came a sound he would never forget. A single, deep, earth-shaking roar cut through the air. It was louder than anything he had ever heard. It sounded like it came from just beyond the barn. The coyotes went dead silent. Then, within seconds, they scattered into the woods. Not another bark or howl came from them after that. Grandpa didn't go outside. He didn't have to. The next morning, everything was quiet. No damage to the coop, no sign of trouble. That was the last time they ever heard or saw the two creatures. Grandpa believed that roar had come from the male, the tall one, and he believed they were protecting the farm, warning the coyotes to stay away. Maybe looked after this place, in their own way, Grandpa had said. Bonnie never forgot those words. And after that night, the barn stood silent again. Just an old structure with a secret that only a few had ever known. Bonnie's life moved on, as life always does. Her grandpa passed away in 1987. A few years later, in 1993, her grandma followed. Losing them was hard, but the memories they left behind, especially this one, never faded. She often thinks back to those quiet days on the farm, the smell of the old barn, the warm eggs in her basket, the sound of her grandpa's steady voice, and, of course, those early mornings when something wild and mysterious lived just a few hundred feet from the back door. She never saw them again, but in her heart, Bonnie believes those two tall, hairy beings never meant any harm. They weren't monsters. They weren't trying to scare anyone. They just needed a safe, quiet place to stay for a little while, and her grandparents' barn gave them that. Bonnie has never told this story to many people, but now, decades later, she felt it was time. Time to share something that stayed in her heart all these years. To you watching this now, thank you for listening. Stories like this remind us that the world still holds some mystery, and sometimes the strangest things can leave behind the warmest memories. This is Benjamin, and on behalf of Bonnie and all of us here at Bigfoot Lovers, thank you for being here. We'll see you again soon with more stories that keep the mystery alive. What a story that was! Bonnie's experience reminds us that not all encounters with the unknown are frightening. Sometimes, they're quiet moments built on respect, understanding, and a little mystery. At Bigfoot Lovers, we share these stories not just to entertain, but to honor the bond between people and the wild world around them. If you enjoyed this one, there are more stories coming soon. And if you haven't yet, feel free to check out the new merch, made with you in mind. From my heart to yours, see you next time right here on Bigfoot Lovers.